Welcome to Multifamily Talks Live, a monthly live video series talking about all things multifamily here on LinkedIn Live. We're live having real, unfiltered conversations about relevant topics. We're making it easy for you to listen. So certainly tune in and listen to us anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn so you don't miss out on future conversations. I'm David Polachek, Industry Principal, Data and Analytics here at RealPage. And today we're talking about data and data-driven decision making. Certainly, this is a topic I'm truly passionate about and one that is critical to the multifamily industry. Whether you're an investor, an owner, an operator, data impacts everything you do, and data is everywhere. But today, I want to help everyone listening answer the question, are you using data to its full potential? To help us break this down and more, we have an incredible guest joining me today, Rich Hughes, SVP of AI Strategy and Innovation, a data scientist and a data nerd at his core, who specializes in multifamily analytics. Rich, so excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thank you for the invite, and thanks to everybody tuning in. Incredible is probably a bit of an oversell, so we'll walk that back a bit, but it's delightful to be here and talk about a thing that I'm really, really passionate about, and I think it's really important for the future of the business.
Well, that makes two of us. So let's jump right into it. So in today's episode, we'll explore kind of the current landscape of what's happening with data in the multifamily industry. We'll talk about some of the challenges that are happening, some of the essential metrics that you should really track. We're going to talk about predictive analytics and AI and how that's transforming the way that we think about and use data. And we're going to even give you some actionable steps for our viewers to get started on really enabling a data-driven decision-making strategy. So we got a lot to cover, and we'll jump right into it. So let's think about this kind of big picture, right? There's no shortage of data available in this industry, and really that data shapes and impacts everything multifamily investors and operators are doing. Nearly every aspect of property management generates data, whether it's through rent collections, lease transactions, leasing. You think about the maintenance side of it, even property financials. Certainly the list goes on. Data is truly everywhere. But from my perspective and what I've experienced as an operator and an owner within the space, many multifamily stakeholders don't know how to fully realize the potential of this data and really turn this data into actionable insights that ultimately guide their business. So, Rich, what is your perspective on the current landscape of data in multifamily?
Oh, okay. Well, I think you framed it really well. I guess the byline would be, or the headline would be, I think we're probably data rich, but insight poor, if we're being honest. We certainly do a better job of collecting and memorializing information and data than we ever have before. It's just how the world is these days. There are two things: digitization, which is basically the memorializing of things into a digital format somewhere electronic in a database. And then digitalization sounds the same, but slightly different, which is how an enterprise embraces technology and uses it to drive their processes and their decisioning to be a better company. I think we've done a good job of digitization. I think digitalization is still happening for the multifamily industry. The headwinds really are a lot of processes and data is still siloed. And that's a function of how organizations just orchestrate themselves and say, okay, this is how responsibilities are going to lie and accountability. So this is a silo and this is the data pertaining to that silo. And so that's how those people are served with data. We're finding there's a lot of value that can be had linking those silos together, or finding how broader processes enact across the multifamily landscape that aren't just specific to one point interaction with a resident or with a guest. Another thing I've seen that's fairly new is what I call KPI bloat, which is people got excited about KPIs and the ability to measure things and help them manage through metrics, and they've asked for a load of KPIs. We RealPage create literally hundreds of KPIs. What I will say is that they're not all equally valuable. Some I don't think are as informative as others. Some I think are critical. But you as a human can't ingest hundreds of KPIs a day to make decisions. So some refactoring of your attention and maybe focusing on higher value KPIs is definitely the way to go. So if information is a forest, we're not really seeing the trees right now, or at least the trees that we really think are valuable and worth climbing, cutting down, whatever you do with trees.
No, that's a lot to unpack there for sure. But certainly there's no shortage of this data. Certainly, there's lots of different KPIs that are out there, and really, it's about trying to figure out and discern from that really what are some of those kind of more higher value things that we want to talk about. So we'll kind of unpack that more as we get through this, but. From your opinion, what are some specific areas that most multifamily operators and owners really struggle with when it comes to using data?
Sure. So one is data is very often contextual, right? If you said, I grew revenue by this, or occupancy by that, or reduced expenses by this, from what to what is more as important. Did you go from just terrible to bad, or did you go from bad to good? So I think benchmarking and context are things that still elude many of our partners. And benchmarking can be versus comparables in the industry or industry benchmarks. Also, it's important to take into account the context of the question. Like, are you looking at a metric that has a seasonal component? Certainly, occupancy is very, very seasonal in most markets. Or it would be wrong to compare the marketing spend of a lease up to a stabilized asset, because they have different missions, and a lease up has to acquire a lot more occupancy in a shorter time than a stabilized asset would have to do. So I think knowing what good and bad looks like and having the context to understand the number you're looking at and maybe some good benchmarks to run it against becomes critical when evaluating data.
Yeah, I mean, right on point. I mean, you think a lot of operators out there are doing some sort of benchmarking, right? Whether it's to their budget or they're looking at to their expectations, right? But I think also you have to understand what that benchmark looks like on a greater sense of really where your performance is relative to others. So good points there. So often operators are using these multiple systems, right, for various processes that they do in their day to day. And therefore, as you had mentioned, right, these processes are almost stuck in these stored separate systems, or as you refer to as kind of siloed systems. So talk to me about why that's such a major issue for multifamily operators when it comes to data.
Sure. So I think oftentimes people understand that having the data be what they call federated or brought together is powerful, and you can see how one process maybe affects another. And oftentimes, say, look at the leasing process. We see that as a chain of activities that starts with demand generation and goes all the way through, finding great prospects, nurturing them, communicating with them. Then you make them residents, and then the residents have a whole different process they go through where they enjoy living at the asset and partaking in it. So, you can see a downstream process and the information you gather there being really important to processes, an upstream process being important to downstream processes that might benefit from learnings and activities that have happened previously. But as we've mentioned, because there are silos institutionally as well as in terms of solutions, that data doesn't get shared as widely as we'd like it to. And oftentimes that's difficult because different systems have different languages, different taxonomies. They may call communities different things, have different constructs about how they look at things. They may even define things like occupancy slightly differently. So what you need to be able to do is create a common language and a common frame of reference. Other issues are, data footprint can be problematic for smaller operators. If you don't have a lot of units and you might not see a lot of observations. Data is more powerful when you have a lot of data to look at, and you can comb through it and feel sure that what you're seeing is important. That's why when they poll people, they look to have a large polling population to see, is it A or B, rather than just asking 5 people. The statistical surety comes with polling population or data footprint. The other thing that's a little bit unique to our business is there's quite a long process cycle time. So think about how long it takes the full leasing and living process for a prospect who becomes a resident. It can be multiple years. If we were selling, white goods, washing machines or something, we could go through those quickly, and the data maybe would be a little bit more informative because it'd be more contemporary. So, we've got the problem of high value transactions but low velocity transactions, and that can make analytics difficult in our space sometimes.
Well, you definitely hit on a lot of struggles out there with the overall data, but I want to isolate one specific kind of point you were talking about there is really how do you bring all of this data together effectively and then take all of those different languages is kind of the best way to talk about it and really normalize that. Because once you can do that, right, then you can start really enabling that data and really take what is that next step that you need to do with that data is being able to perform an analysis off of that. So thinking in that light, how do we ensure that data is truly driving those actionable insights versus just overwhelming operators with numbers and metrics?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is the current state of where, separating great operators from good operators. So the first thing is we've got all these KPIs, we've got a wealth of data. How do you know what, if something you're measuring is actually meaningful to you? And I'd argue that meaningful things, they cash out economically, right? We do things, we delight residents because it's the right thing to do, but in delighting residents, we achieve greater economics than if we weren't great with residents, or we have a wonderful community and living experience because you can be rewarded more fully for that. So what you really need to do is anchor your metrics to an empirical outcome. And dollars is probably the best of all, right? But generally, there are two ways to do that, and we do them both at RealPage to some degree. The first is a sort of bottom-up version where you say, okay, this process will save people, X amount of, labor, or Y amount of materials, and that times the number of transactions times the time is this amount of dollars. The other way you can do it is top down, where you can just say, okay, I know the performance of an asset financially, and I know these factors. Let me run an analysis, and through machine learning, it will tell me the things that are actually driving revenue performance and the things that maybe are not so important with regard to the revenue picture. So you have to be able to do both. I think having a causal narrative, the first way is great because you can tell people how it makes money. But actually, the second method is probably more powerful because you get some statistical rigor and the ability to test multiple things. One thing I will say in this sort of KPI bloat world is if you look at aeroplanes, so aviation, and especially military aviation, they had a problem with information overload that they overcame. When you get in a modern military plane, there's a lot of warning systems that are turned on by default, and they will start shouting at you various things that you should be doing if you're in trouble. And this actually became an impediment because pilots couldn't actually process them. So now people go and turn off a lot of these systems and just leave the critical ones in place. So, other industries have had to deal with information overload of low value and just focus their activities on higher value information data points.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, one sense you're talking about, let's anchor ourselves on really what we're looking to understand and what are the processes that are involved in that, and the KPIs that play with that. And then on the other side, right, let's make sure that we don't get overloaded by how many there are, but really what are the specific KPIs that are going to ultimately help us drive our business. So I like both that. We're talking about anchors on one side and airplanes on the next. So yeah. So traditionally operators have really relied on more of a historical data approach to really make decisions, right? What's happened in the past will certainly impact the future. But today, right, data is becoming more readily available, which is certainly changing the way the industry is making decisions. So is data helping multifamily operators make better and faster decisions? What's your overall thought on that?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sure we've all seen the sort of diagram showing the sort of information value hierarchy from diagnostic analytics through to predictive analytics, etc. Backwards looking is fine. It lets you have a retrospective and understand where things went wrong and maybe learn some high level things of what you might have done different. But the predictive space is obviously more exciting because it allows you to change reality that you have not yet experienced and maybe enjoy better economics or create a better living environment or serve residents better. So the movement to predictive analytics is key because it allows you to cash them out today in flight for a better tomorrow for yourselves, for the resident, for prospects. Also, the more we can, the more information becomes digital, the more we can use it in real-time decisioning. Especially around in the leasing space is probably the fastest data that we have, right? Guest cards and communications and those things. That the data there can be used in real time to inform decisioning, and maybe based on a communication history, suggest the right floor plan or invoke the right policy or talk about pets. So that's one thing. There's also a much slower but arguably more valuable strategic framework, which is rather than dealing with running your business in the best possible way you can, the strategic framework's more about which market should I be in? What types of products should I build? Should I dispose of assets? Are there too many high rises and I don't want to do that anymore? What does Atlanta look like versus Dallas? So these data points tend to be, slower moving just by the nature of them, but they probably drive capital decisions, which can be really, really important to your portfolio. So as you work out strategically how you want to operate as in the multifamily space, this data becomes critical. And having AI help you there can let you look at more deals or evaluate more markets or understand risk better. So it too is valuable, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up an interesting point and kind of leads me down a path that I was gonna go with this conversation. Really is, obviously, technology is evolving rapidly in multifamily right now. We're seeing a lot of this come out there, but I think you started to allude to this, right? What are those technologies that are shaping the future of multifamily data and analytics?
Okay, so it's a great question. What I'll say is every entity, people, buildings, management companies are all creating more data. And next year, you will create more data than you created this year. And that's not going to stop anytime soon. So what we're finding is there's this massive data memorialization, but unfortunately, it still exists in data ecosystems. Maybe ecosystems are a little bigger than the silos we talked about. But for example, a prospect will have their own data ecosystem with a bunch of information that we might find useful to help them lease an apartment, or they might find useful to share. If we can delight them, that would be spectacular. Different vendors might have different data ecosystems. Buildings, physical buildings might have data ecosystems. So the ability to share data to trusted sources in a permission-based structure becomes really, really important, because it's going to be about the bringing together of data from different disparate sources in a way to create value for all of them. Another thing that we're really excited about at RealPage is agentic AI, which is where AI can look at this data from multiple different sources and help drive decisions or assist a human in making the decision. So, it becomes a really smart, active consumer of information that can drive business processes forward.
Well, I'm glad you went that direction, because I was going to go that direction next. So, I feel like everyone's talking about AI, right? It's where you're hearing everything, and we hear about different companies and people utilizing AI. But am I right in thinking that really not all AI is the same? And furthermore, to fuel an appropriate AI system, you really have to have a lot of underlying data. And furthermore, you got to have the knowledge on how to use that AI with the data. What are your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. I mean, how AI learns isn't that different to how people learn, right? You go and you look at a bunch of historical examples of a thing and the outcomes that were associated with it. And from that, you make some reasonable inferences about the things that created the outcomes. And then you can use that knowledge moving forward to create outcomes you want by making those things happen or enabling those things. So having a wealth of historical facts is critical to AI. Also, having outcomes. You imagine if I was to try and make a medicine, but I didn't know if people got better from my tests, right? That would be nonsense. But there are vendors out there that are in the AI space yet don't have access to outcomes. So, I'm sure they're learning as they go, but it's better to just be able to take all of history and learn. And in fact, one thing AI is really good at is, while we might read a book at a time to learn about something, AI can just go and plunder the entire library and know everything about historically about a thing. And as new events happen, even if they happen at scale and very quickly, AI can be informed of that and adjust its decisioning and thought processing accordingly. So, I think that's the strength of AI. So a big footprint with high quality data that you can trust, and actually some credibility in the AI space of having done it before. We're fortunate we've got a good pedigree with AI. Everyone's currently leaning into this agentic AI, sort of your GPTs of the world. But in classic analytic AI, we've done some great work there as well that we're delighted to stand behind. So we've always tried to sort of be on the the forefront of AI, and we see it not as a through thread for all our operations. It's a pillar on which we will build all new functionality, because it's not going away, and it will become a differentiator between great operators and good operators.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think the more we can unpack the way to really leverage AI, and I like your thought process, right? You have to think about what the outcome is and overall kind of what you're looking to take out of that. So I think those are all very good points to put forward. I'm going to take a second here and engage our audience here on LinkedIn. So I want to hear from all of you. So I have a question I'm going to pose out there for everyone. So what data-driven tools or strategies have made the biggest impact on your overall business? We'd love for you to share our thoughts here on the LinkedIn chat. So go ahead and put that in there, and we'll keep plugging away here. So Rich, back to our topic at hand here. So now that we've identified some, overall challenges, really some emerging trends, let's talk about some of those key metrics that owners and operators really should focus on. So Rich, if you had to pick your top three, so we won't get into our kind of KPI amount of list here, but what should every multifamily operator really track, and what would those top three be for you?
So I'll be honest, and this will be massively disappointing to both you and the audience, but my top ones would probably be NOI, revenue, occupancy, cap rates if I'm buying or selling. Right now, renewal rates at an all-time high, and that affects a lot of other things in the community dynamic. So they'd be the ones they're like obvious because they're important, or they're important because they're obvious, right? But they're so tightly linked to the financial health of an asset. They would be the ones. So I don't have some clever esoteric, here's a metric you've not looked at before. Well, I do have, but it would be nowhere as near as important as NOI, for example. So, I'm going to stand behind the tried and true economic pillars of the enterprise.
I mean, I was kind of hoping you were going to come out with some wild and crazy KPI that I hadn't even heard of. So I was kind of hoping for that. But anything else? Like, is anything on the renewal side kind of interesting to you?
Yeah. So I don't, but the renewal rate, renewal propensity is at an all-time high pretty much right now. So communities are doing a great job. Residents are sticking around and loving their living experience. But obviously that can affect the dynamics of a community. If more people are staying, then that potentially means you need less people through the front door. It might mean you need less marketing. Or how you position the community can change. So whether this is a sustainable long-term phenomena, or just a sort of a trend that we're seeing that's maybe an artifact of social and economic things converging at the moment, I don't know. But renewal rate is definitely one that's interesting and sort of cascades through to all of property operations. Now, sorry, go ahead, David.
I was going to say, I mean, are there any specific data points that indicate whether a resident or unit might renew or not renew their lease? Like, is there anything interesting there that you would shed some light on?
Yeah, there are actually a load of very, very informative ones, but rather than reel off the list of variables used by renewal models that we create, I'm just going to flip it around and sort of say, they don't, it's not random why they renew. Think about the driving force. What type of resident renews? A happy resident, right? So what activities makes a resident happy, or what does a happy resident look like? Well, a happy resident probably actually has already renewed a couple of times before. They're a fan at this point. They love the community. It's their home. So there's one thing, right? Multi-generational lease residents likely to stick around. Are there service requests being attended to in a reasonable time frame? Are they active in the community? Have they left reviews? Speaking of the community, what's the community's reputation like, right? The community is an entity that needs to be measured as well. And, reputation we've seen is a big driver, both in terms of new leasing capabilities and renewal intent. So that would definitely be something that I would drill down on. I think the key point is there are lots of factors. It's multifactorial, renewal intent. And you have to be able to look at all of the factors and understand the relative power and importance of each of them when you make your decisions, because that's going to affect where you put your effort and time and attention. Also noteworthy is not all residents are touchable in the renewal process. Some are definitely staying unless you annoy them. Some are definitely leaving because their jobs now been moved, across the country, and they can't stay even though they love it here. And then there's this sort of middle ground which are maybe more influenceable. But even for that pool of people that are leaving, sometimes there are signals. For example, someone signs a 3-month lease. Why did they do that? It's almost certainly more expensive per month than a 12-month. Arguably, they have to be somewhere in 3 months, and that probably means they're not going to be in the neighborhood or renewing with you. So even for those people, we can see some signals in the data.
Well, I appreciate you answering that question because I think it's applicable to what's happening out in a lot of markets right now with obviously, a lot of kind of supply being out there and certainly operators are looking for ways to be able to keep a retention high, right? And keep those residents where they are. So just thought I would challenge you on that question a little bit. So kind of down the predictive analytics route, right? You're hearing a lot of people talking about predictive analytics, and it's kind of becoming a buzzword within multifamily real estate. But I don't really think everyone fully understands what constitutes a predictive analytic. So help us here a little bit. Can you break this down a little bit? Tell me exactly what your opinion on predictive analytics is, and really how does it work?
Sure. So the value of predictive, say, versus diagnostic analytics is it lets you impact future events that haven't yet happened. So you can change the economics you're going to experience. Anything that's happened has happened, and you can't. It's fixed, right? Time machines aren't real, so we live with it. But predictive analytics, you can go forward and use them to make the best possible decisions for yourself, your residents, and your prospects. How it works is the same as most AI models. You go back and look at a bunch of events that you care about and contributing factors that you think may have caused that event or led to it. You create a model, and then from that model, you look at the causal events today and say, okay, these events aren't where I need them to be to give me the outcome I want in the future. So therefore, I'll make changes, whether it's, my make ready time isn't good, or my make ready quality is bad, or maybe it's something with regard to, credit screening processes, or, advertising channels that you use. So it's powerful because it allows you to learn what worked historically and apply it to the future and take those benefits. I guess for me, the trivial example for predictive analytics is, think, for example, the Titanic, the vessel that sadly crashed all those years ago. Knowing it crashed is great, and get everyone to the lifeboats is definitely the outcome of that analytic. But had you known there was an iceberg coming, half a mile away, a little turn of the wheel and history would have been completely different. So for me, that's the power of predictive analytics. It's the ability to really course correct and pick the best possible future for yourself.
Well, Rich, I love the Titanic example there because I think that's a good way of talking about being able to understand what could happen, right? Certainly, we've talked about planes, we've talked about ships, all kinds of things as we talk about data today. So I think it's helpful to kind of put that into context. So, Rich, this has been really an insightful conversation. And before we wrap up, I want to kind of plug into your brain a little bit here. So, what's one piece of advice that you'd give an owner or an operator looking to really change the way they look at data and make better data-driven decisions?
Sure. Well, first of all, anyone that's going on the journey, I salute you. I think it's, embracing sort of the scientific method in management operations is just great for everybody. So look, the first thing is just make sure you've got the data to work with to start with. If you don't have a digital footprint that you think is great, fix it, because the future starts now. So digitalize and digitize as much as you can. And when you look at the data, evaluate it in a framework. What's the velocity of the data? Do you get these data points every day, or is it an annual data thing? How recent is the data? Is it contemporary, or you're dealing with old data, which is maybe less informative? The quality, do you feel that this event has been well measured and is accurate, or do you feel it's more of a notional sense of what was going on? So, audit the data you get and see how well you feel about the quality of it. Next thing, arguably, is democratize the data. So if you're going to manage to metrics, let everybody see them, the good and the bad. Let's paint what good looks like on a dashboard that everybody can see when they log on, and track our performance to it. And then collectively we can march in the right direction. And the final thing is embrace empiricism. So, we all have notions and things that we want to be right, but at the end of the day, reality is this cruel mistress that just does what she wants. So we play in it. That's the regime we have to operate in. So the way you embrace empiricism is you use statistical hypothesis testing or experimentation to say, okay, what if I change the way I do things? What outcomes do I see? And in doing those experiments, some of which will be successes and some of it will be failures, you will learn a better path forward. What I will say is, as you have this introspective moment around data and maybe AI enablement, you'll realize you're doing some things really well. That's great. Keep doing those things. You'll realize you're doing, there are things you should be doing that you're not doing. And that's a great learning opportunity to create value. But, from an ego standpoint, the worst thing is you're doing lots of things you think are important, but really aren't. And that's, that's for me a big takeaway is you may have some things that rules that you've sort of evangelized that you think are very, very important, but actually they don't manifest in economic outcomes. And so that becomes the time to let them go and focus on better things that maybe create more positive outcomes for you.
Well, Rich, I asked for one and you gave us quite a few there. So everyone listening, you got quite a few different nuggets of information there. So I appreciate that. So really some great advice here. If you enjoyed today's episodes, please make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, and certainly follow us on Multifamily Talks Live. Thanks again, Rich. Obviously, we could have gone on for probably another hour or so here. There's a lot to unpack here, but certainly we got some great nuggets out today.
Thanks for the invite. I really enjoyed it. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody next time. Thank you so much.